Hello everyone. Last night we heard that the US President Donald J. Trump has lost the case in the US Supreme Court on imposition of tariffs. Now, on the face of it, it would seem like Trump has been defeated. Yes, Trump has lost, but the other countries haven't won either. Let me explain what this means for Indian exporters for the so-called temporary deal of 18% that India had with the US and for global markets. What is this ruling all about? Donald Trump had used an old power called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which is used when a country or the US is facing war or warlike situations to ban trade, impose embargoes, and block goods coming from what is designated as an enemy country or an adversary. Trump, if you remember, had imposed tariffs on over 90 countries, including that island with penguins. Now, the US Supreme Court has interpreted that this power is used only in terms when there is a war or a warlike situation. It upheld the right of the president to impose embargoes or block goods coming from those countries where it faces a warlike situation. However, the United States couldn't be facing a war or waging a war against the rest of the world, 90 plus countries and the island with penguins. Also, the US Supreme Court determined that while the president can impose embargoes, he has no right to impose tariffs. The power under Article 1 lies with the Congress. Now, how does this translate for Donald Trump and for the rest of the world? In the Hindi movies, there is this line that हार के भी जीतने वाले को बाजीगर कहते हैं, which is basically risk entrepreneurship. A few weeks back, I had written a column on this, on the possible outcomes and the responses to the outcomes in the US Supreme Court. And I said that like in a casino, the house never loses. It's only the gamblers who lose. So in the case of the US, every country is betting on the US economy to sell goods. So they are not necessarily winners here. Now, what has Trump done after the power to impose IEEPA has been taken away? What do we do in IPL matches when you're scoring badly? We bring in an impact substitute. Now, what is Trump's impact substitute in this case? Trump's impact substitute is Section 122, which allows Trump to impose universal tariffs of around 10% across the board for 150 days till it is ratified by the Congress. Now remember, Trump holds the majority in Congress as yet. That might change later, but as of now, he holds the House. The second impact substitute that Trump can bring in is Section 301, which is basically a committee which looks into adverse trade practices, determination of unfair trade tariffs, non-tariff barriers. Now, this committee will determine that XYZ country or XYZ commodity manufactured in the US needs protection, and it can impose that. There is also Section 232. If you remember, the pharma products have not yet faced tariffs. So this might come through later. Now, how does all this look for the Indian exporter? Now, the Indian exporter is still facing tariffs that were 25 plus. Remember, the 18% tariff is not yet jotted down, not yet inked, not yet signed. Whatever you can call the 18% tariff, framework of temporary agreement or agreement of temporary framework, whatever you call it. What does this mean to all the conditionalities that the US imposed on India on buying of Russian crude oil and other stuff? We'll have to wait for the Ministry of External Affairs and the Commerce Ministry to clarify that. You might get a word salad or you might get an actual answer. Let's wait for that answer to come. But as of now, Indian exporters will face 3.5% tariff that they faced earlier, the average tariff, plus 10%. Now remember, this will and could go up once Trump ramps up his weaponization of tariffs. So under 301, he can expressly address discriminatory practices. He can say that India does not allow US to export agricultural goods into India or export dairy products into India and impose a tariff. Section 232 has an ability to adjust the level of imports, the quantum of imports that come into US and the prices at which they come into the US and which commodities come into the US. So that is the third impact substitute. There are other impact substitutes, if I may add to you. Now, what happens in international situations is that all these weapons allow a country to renegotiate the terms of engagement. Now, the terms of engagement will change, and Trump is unlikely to give up on his, what did he call that? That tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. So his love for tariffs as a weapon, as a leverage to use on countries to get what he wants, whether it is territory, whether it is Greenland, whether it is rare earth minerals, whether it's investments from Japan, whether it's investments from Korea. Now, a whole lot of questions still remain. For instance, what happens to the $175 billion that the US has collected as tariffs from countries? So, two possibilities. A, first let's clear this. The US Supreme Court has not addressed this issue at all. In fact, in the whole judgment or the ruling and the opinions of the honorable judges, the word refund appears 4 times. It appears in the dissent note of Justice Kavanaugh, where he worries about the refunds and the chaos that this might cause. Now, effectively, you can interpret that the Supreme Court has kicked back the can into the lower courts, the International Court of Trade and other courts. What would they do? There is a provision in the US law which says remand without vacatur, which means that you can stop the imposition of a law imposing costs on anybody without refunding the costs. So this could well happen because, who gives back money in the international scene in such a complicated situation? There are other weapons that are possible for the refunds, which is if a US citizen or a US importer goes to court. For instance, this case itself, the case against IEEPA, was launched by a small educational instruments company. And interestingly, the 2 advocates were Indians. The advocate on record, Pratik Shah, and the guy who argued the case, Neil Katyal, are both children of Indian immigrants. So even in the age of AI and everything, the Indian gene is sort of playing out its part in the US story. There are many questions that are pending, and Trump yesterday was unusually ballistic. So he is unlikely to give up on his demands over countries to do X, Y, or Z. For instance, on India to stop buying Russian crude. Now, we don't know whether the imposition of the extra tariffs on India on purchase of Russian crude falls in the ambit of the current US court ruling. I do not think so. So that is still an open weapon. We do not know whether the imposition of tariffs on other countries for purchase of materials from other countries, the ban on use of certain technologies, all of these can be used as weapons. We have to look ahead and see what best India can do in the given condition. India's first response should be to not celebrate. This is not an occasion to celebrate. This is something, an occasion to introspect, into study. So I hope there are no celebrations and gung-ho statements, how we, there shouldn't be other kind of stupid comments either, that we should have waited for the Supreme Court judgment. Because even after the Supreme Court judgment, you could end up facing 18 or more percentage of tariffs. Just imagine this. Trump has the power to impose tariffs on all the digital exports that we do, the software services. Trump has the power to impose tariffs on pharmaceuticals. Drug pricing is a major issue in the US. He can still do it. So let's not celebrate. Let's calmly understand what is happening in the US. The best outcome for India would be that the US inflation rate goes up, they are unable to bring down the interest rates, and thereafter maybe the system, the administration will come to its senses and go back to its original form. Thank you.